Hey everyone, in this video we're going to dive into Azure Service Groups. But before we do that, let's look at why we need another type of grouping construct at all when we kind of have a lot of those already. So today, when I think about Azure resources, we have a number of constructs for their organization, but also their management. I can think that, well, we have subscriptions. So subscriptions is often kind of that ultimate boundary. It's also a billing type boundary. So I can have N number of subscriptions. Now within the subscriptions, I deploy into a resource group. So I have, again, N number of resource groups that live in my subscription. I'm going to focus on one of them. We have the resource group. And this is primarily focused around the lifecycle management. I put resources that get created together, they run together, ultimately get decommissioned together within a resource group. So inside this thing, I have my resources. Hey, I have a database, I have some element of compute, and I can apply various things, permissionings, policy, I can do budgets. And then on these various types of resource, both subscriptions, resource groups, and resources, we have tagging. So tagging is really useful if I have some kind of metadata that I want to be able to track about the resource themselves. So these are all fantastic. We have all of these various things, but there's been a lot of feedback. Actually, from many different channels. You can think about Microsoft's own first-party services that they're trying to do stuff with, customers and partner teams. And the problem is these existing constructs, if you actually look at them, lack a lot of flexibility. Often today, if I'm an application team, I don't own the hierarchy of the subscriptions, of the resource groups. It's laid down and set that everyone will use. And so everyone has to then fall in line with this certain scheme. So then I try and work around it based on, well, how do I want to try and manage things? Maybe I use a naming, but often naming is set. I'll use tags to maybe, hey, this is part of this workload, or this is part of this particular cell or this component of the workloads. But then even tags get very complex. If a certain component, for example, is used in multiple different services, maybe I have a set of hub services like a firewall or connectivity or a database, an index. And so now I get conflicts if I'm trying to actually handle the idea that something is part of multiple components, is part of some overriding hierarchy. So it's very difficult to do and solve those problems. And also, tagging is very hard to set as the scope for something. If there is some type of service, it's hard to say, hey, I want to apply this service or this monitoring or whatever to a tag. So what's required is the idea that I want something really flexible that can take the existing types of resources, the subscriptions, the resource groups, the resources, but let us put it into another structure that's completely flexible that I can use for my purposes that match the modeling of my service, my capability, what I want to do. And as you would expect, given the title of this video, as is always the case, the solution to this is this new thing, Azure Service Groups. ASGs. These are very generic, and you'll see this when we start to dive into them. They're not tied to any particular scenario. And one of the key things that's really important when we start diving into these, they are very much designed around the idea of least privilege. They don't inherently just give you a set of permissions and something I have to really consider carefully before I start creating them or putting things in. Because as we're going to see, they don't actually do very much. But it doesn't mean they're not powerful. So what are they? Where do they sit? So one of the really important things to understand is these are a tenant level resource. So we always think about, hey, all of our Azure subscriptions, our services, well, they belong to a certain Entra tenant. So the same thing is going to apply right here. I have the concept of my Entra tenant. And any Azure subscription trusts and can only trust one Entra tenant. As soon as I create the first service group, so I create one of them, what actually happens behind the scenes, and you can see it, it's going to create a root service group, which is going to belong to the particular Entra tenant. The ID of this root service group will be that of your Entra tenant. And the first service group you actually create will be a child of that root service group. So this is going to be the parent. And we can see this if we go and take a look. So if I jump over to the portal for a second, if I go and look at my service groups straight away, and it's grayed out, you can see I have a tenant root service group. And its ID is the same as my Entra tenant. And then under that, I have ones that I have created. So these are the direct children of my root service group. And then you can see here, I've got a child of another service group. And then there's the actual IDs of my service group. So testing, Saviltech, workload alpha, and actually I took one that's called service group itself. So straight away, what is this telling us? It's telling us in a fantastic way that I can have a hierarchy because of that parent-child set of relationships. So, hey, I drew the idea of, hey, I have one service group right here, but I can absolutely go and create others. So I can have another service group over here, and maybe the root is its parent. But I might go and create child service groups of this one, because maybe in my scenario, my particular workload is the sum of multiple cells. Maybe I have a regional deployment, so I have multiple cells that make up my particular workload, but they ultimately roll up to my workload. So I want to be able to have that hierarchy. And so this is really powerful that now I can separate the individual maybe parts, cells, components of some application or service, but then roll them up to a parent that is the overall complete offering. After I have created the first service group, then whenever I create a second, a third, a fourth, it will ask me, well, what is the parent? So if I jump over to this again, and I say, hey, I want to create a new service group, I specify here the parent. And it's going to show me my existing hierarchy. And I can just go and pick any of these. And then I have to go and give it a service group name. And then I would just review, create, and I'm done. But that's a key part of this component. Now, super important point. These service group names that I'm creating, if I'll give myself a little bit of space here, the service group names you select must be globally unique per cloud, not per tenant, per the entire cloud. So the Azure public cloud or the US Gov cloud. They are case insensitive, but because of that globally unique nature, you're going to want a pretty good naming scheme in effect. So maybe mine would be, well, Saviltech, service group, alpha 1, or whatever that might be. So really important point here, they are cloud level unique. So once again, it is not just your tenant. If I take a name, no one else in that cloud, so Azure Cloud, in any tenant in Azure region as part of Azure Pub Cloud, would be able to use that name. Now there are, if we go and look at that, which is why I did this evil laugh under the naming of this one, I got in there early and took the name service group. So no one else in the entire Azure public cloud could use the term service group. So I'm like, whoa, an evil laugh. For the naming, they can be up to 250 characters. They are alphanumeric, and I can also use those special characters that it lists there. So you have some flexibility. They can be very large names, but it is super important that as an organization, you probably want to get a very good naming structure in place there. If you use storage accounts have exactly the same thing. Those names have to be globally unique. Now, I mentioned the idea that, hey, great, I can create a hierarchy now because I got those parent-child relationships. Well, that hierarchy you can create can actually be, not including the root, 10 levels deep. So I can create a super deep hierarchy so it can really match how I want it to actually work. In terms of permissions, anyone really within the tenant can create a service group if they have right permission on pretty much anything. Because again, as we're going to see, on its own, it's super low privilege. It really can't do very much. There's not really a danger letting someone create a service group. So what can I actually put in a service group? So I've talked about how we've got these service groups. I can create a hierarchy and I can have 10 levels deep. Great, great, great. What do I do with the thing? So what I can put in this is actually anything that has an Azure Resource Manager ID. So I can put into this, well, I could add subscriptions. I could add resource groups. I could add individual resources. I cannot add management groups today. So not management groups. So that's an important thing to understand what you can't do. And any of these can be part of more than one. This is not a one-to-one relationship. So, hey, this subscription here, actually, I also want it to be part of this other Azure Service Group over there. It's just like adding users to members of groups. This is a group, an Azure Service Group. So one resource group, one subscription can be part of more than one service group. So if I go and have a look again, we jump over, and I look over here. If I just select one of them, so I look at my alpha workload, we'll see this concept over here, relationship management. I can already see it has 3 members. And I'll go and look at the members. And what you'll see here, I added 2 resource groups and then a resource. I can add other things. So again, it's showing me, hey, you can add resources, resource groups, and subscriptions into any particular service group. Now, obviously, it had the word there of a relationship, which is how these things are actually working. So when I go and add any of these resources, resource groups, or subscriptions, what it's actually doing is it's creating an extension resource on the source resource. So it's creating a relationship. So it's a child extension of whatever that source resource is. Now, what that means is, I can have many relationships for any given resource. To be able to add a resource into a service group, I have to be able to create this idea of a service group member for the relationship. So I have to have the ability to write a relationship onto the resource. And if I jump back over to the portal for a second, and let's just look at anything. I don't really care what. Let's look at resource group. I'll just pick anything. If I was to go and create a custom role and look at my permissions, what we're looking at here is this relationship type. And I can see I've got Microsoft.relationships. So what I have to be able to do is this right? So I want to create or update a service group membership. So I need this permission on that sub, that resource group or resource to be able to actually go and create that thing. Now, most regular permissions you have to resources will have that. Longer term, I suspect they'll create a role specific to adding the relationships. Today, I guess, or soon, you'll be able to go and create a custom role. So just create a custom role with that permission I just showed you into it, and then they would be able to go and add it. In terms of limits, so remember, we're creating these relationships. So today, within a subscription, I can have 2,000 relationships per sub. So that's all of the resources within that. So if I created the relationship on the resource group or resource on the sub itself, that counts against that 2,000 number. Now, if I add a subscription or a resource group, that's one relationship, and it would include everything in it. So if I add the resource group that contains a bunch of stuff into a service group, that's only one relationship out of that 2,000 I'm actually consuming. And there is no member limit. So I can have as many subs, resource groups, or resources as I want within a service group. Okay, so you get the idea. You can add subs, resource groups, and resources into these service groups that have the lovely, lovely hierarchy. But I also keep going on about the fact that, but don't worry, because you can't do anything. So what can I do? What is the point in the service group? But first, let's be very clear on what I can't do. What I can't do is deploy. I cannot deploy to a service. It is not a deployment scope. I still deploy primarily to a resource group. I cannot assign policy to a service group. I cannot set permissions. I said it's super low privilege. So what can I do? What I can do is this is going to be a scope for some other functionality. And this is its whole purpose. The whole goal of the Azure Service Group is to be a scope for functionality. That's its only purpose. So a good example of this would be, so e.g., health monitoring. What do I care about when I think about my service? I want to be able to monitor its health. Today, my overall service may be made up of things in different resource groups, different subscriptions. So I can't easily group them in a way that makes sense for me to actually just monitor, the individual cells or components of my service, and then roll that up to actually my service itself and its health. I have to create tool-specific constructs to model it because, resource groups and subscriptions and tags, it doesn't match what I actually want to be able to do. Your service likely has a hierarchy. I can now model my service's hierarchy in a way that makes sense for me. It's super flexible. I can move things around. I can then use it. And if you think about it, I think health monitoring is just the one they're leading with. But once you have this idea of grouping and organizing workloads in a way that's logical for the workload, I don't know what the roadmap is, but resiliency to me would be a super useful thing. Hey, what's the resiliency? Can I go and map if there's a challenge, if there's a problem? Because if I group the things that make up a cell, actually you've got a single point of failure in here. That would then lead up to my all-up service. It has a single point of failure. So think of this as a way for you to model the actual grouping and hierarchy of structure of your services. That's the whole point. Now, there is work being done, for example, when we talk about the service groups, to be able to facilitate certain operational management via Azure policy. For example, I want to enforce a certain naming policy. That is something that work is being done around there. There's also work being done about, well, how I'm currently manually assigning these relationships. But imagine if there was a way to actually, hey, look, maybe based on the tag, if it has this value within it, add it to this particular thing. So there's other work being done to really just make this even more powerful and useful for you to use. It is super important to understand these because these Azure Service Groups are going to become the foundation of a lot of other functionality. They're going to be that scope. So when you're using a health monitoring today, but many other things in the future, you're going to want to start modeling your workloads using the service groups to be able to take advantage of, hey, all these other functionalities that are going to be added. So that was it. As always, I hope this was useful. And until next video, take care.